for the beast. Leigh had seen her best friend die, then watched her wake up seconds later.
Her eyes opened. I know it.
No matter how many times it replayed in her mind, she couldn't fully grasp the sound of Casey's neck snapping in Joseph's hand, or what it meant, unsure if she should laugh or cry. 20 minutes before, she'd been standing on a tarmac in an airport in northern Africa, when Joseph and his girlfriend, a woman named Chloe, dressed like a pirate, had coerced Leigh into thinking of the archaeology building at UCL. She had no idea why they would make such a request until they both grabbed her, and a blazing white storm that made her feel like she was torn apart and put back together again brought her to London in an instant. Without time to process how she'd traveled so far so fast, Leigh locked eyes with Casey and felt her first bit of happiness since Joseph had entered her life. There was a man Leigh didn't recognize, the same height as Casey, standing next to her in the project lab. His hands were like red-hot pokers, and his arms caught fire when he attacked Joseph, seemingly to give Casey a chance to get away. But the plan failed. After no more than a few seconds, the mystery man got his ass thrown out a window, leaving Joseph free to nab Casey and do his worst. Chloe, restraining Leigh from entering the fight, seemed to hear someone coming and whispered, "The Celestial is here." Joseph then ordered them out.
"They can't be allowed to see you. Take Professor Evans and go."
Before Leigh was transported away, she saw Joseph murder Casey and crawl out the window to safety. Falling in slow motion, Casey was caught,
By some miracle.
by a woman in a leather jacket who appeared out of nowhere. The woman must have had a blue medicinal fucking firework in her pocket too, because there was a blast of light, and Casey woke up as if she'd fallen asleep in the woman's arms.
She has to be alive. I didn't dream that. Right?
Presently, standing in tall, wet grass on the side of a road in the northern outskirts of London, which Leigh recognized from her frequent drives to cool off in her years as a graduate student, she could only feel shame. The nightmare she was living with Joseph was supposed to be her own, not Casey's.
Anyone but her. Why was she there in the first place? What does she want with the stones? And who was the little fire guy with the big eyebrows?
Chloe stood watch on the other side of the road, glancing back to glare every now and then. No cars or trucks had come by since they'd arrived 5 minutes before, and all of Leigh's attempts to converse had failed. "So, how do you make those wormholes?" she asked soon after arriving, referring to the space bridges in the sci-fi books she'd read as a kid. Chloe's lips tightened, holding in her tongue and the harsh words likely resting on it. She shook her head. "You can't fathom the number of ways I could... Imagine this, girl, being sent through every conceivable emotion so violently your head spins backwards." "Sounds unpleasant," Leigh said. "Then be quiet," Chloe snapped. "We're waiting until my nameless calls." A few minutes went by before Leigh decided,
To hell with that.
"So, are you a follower of Joseph's, or..." Chloe shook her head and laughed angrily. "I do follow him. Closely. To make sure he doesn't get too distracted. All great minds do." "Sounds like you're the one who's really in charge." Chloe glowered. "No one is in charge." "Not even the big guy? You know..." Leigh pointed up. "Just because you're human doesn't mean you have to believe any of that. The problem with the universe isn't that there is a god, or gods.
who allow bad things to happen and punish us. It's that there's no such thing as gods at all, and the only punishment is now.
The woman spoke so resolutely it sent a chill through Leigh, who fumbled her next words.
I can agree with you there. I had to fight my mom on a similar subject many times. Always seemed weird to me that someone who was cursed to spend their years dwindling away in one spot,
CMD, Leigh thought,
would hold onto their faith so resolutely. I believe pain exists to help life grow. Call me crazy. I'm a history buff.
The woman laughed again.
Your idea of history is adorable at best. I've been roaming this forsaken planet for nearly 1,200 years, cleaning up the messes mankind makes for itself. Your kind is seen as nothing but a battery to unearth. Did you know that? And the Midolians are the ones who have to maintain it. Time's circle is no mystery to me. The only parts you remember are the dark tunnels. Trust me. 1,200? You don't look a day over 8 or 9,
Leigh said, light as a feather. Chloe smirked, then stopped herself and frowned.
I'm starting to see why my beloved likes you.
It was Leigh's turn to laugh.
If he liked me, he'd let me go. I honestly don't know what you see in that guy.
Chloe rested her hand on her sword hilt, as though aching to draw and use it.
I see what you and everyone else refuse to. What? An ambitious psycho? My darling Nameless knows true pain. He has seen the worst the universe has to offer and wishes to fix it. He wishes for no one to be forced to serve another, as he and all life have for countless millennia. So your plan is just wipe it all away and start anew? No. Wipe it away and never begin again. To end all life, and with it, all suffering. It is a great burden we have taken, giving life what it has always craved, yet always been too scared to demand. Only one can hold the key. My Nameless. He will be the first to tear into the fabric of space, and the sooner we get there, the sooner he and all of life, so tired and worn, can finally rest.
Leigh leaned on a bare fence post on the side of the road to catch her breath. This conversation was starting to feel like a marathon.
You felt the abyss within the brothers. You've had a taste, a drop of the ocean,
Chloe said with visible pride.
They're the most potent collection of negative energy in all of existence. My beloved can take a sip, but only together can they release their full strength. An unstoppable wave. Pretty shitty to take away everyone else's chances at happiness just 'cause you can't find your own,
Leigh said. Chloe leaned close, her gray eyes now level with Leigh's.
Try being born into servitude as tools for corrupt bureaucrats, knowing your life and sentence could last indefinitely thanks to your species' insurmountable lifespan. Then, and only then, tell me you disagree.
Before Leigh could respond, Chloe looked at the sky, like a hound that had caught a scent.
Finally,
she said, drawing her sword.
I didn't mean it. I'm sorry,
Leigh said, hands up, closing her eyes. Chloe swung the sword in a wide arc, and a vertical tornado of light engulfed her. Leigh kept her eyes closed and was suddenly alone. The notion of running away barely had time to gestate before the light and fury returned, along with Chloe and a tall, familiar menace in a cloak. Joseph immediately stole away from them, and Chloe followed. Their sparring sounded like a lover's spat, even though Leigh couldn't make any of it out, as they were speaking in a bizarre language she'd never heard before. The sounds were deep, slippery, and choked by vowels. Joe seemed furious about something, and Chloe was having difficulty talking him down. Suddenly breaking into English, she shouted, "We'll get him back! Just tell me Raid is safe!" With a huff, Joseph blasted steam out of the sides of his mask, then spoke calmly.
"He is."
Reaching into his pocket, he produced the middle-sized Gehenna stone. "I can taste your agitation. Give it a rest. Don't get sidetracked," Chloe finished, motioning at Leigh. Joseph's mask turned on her. "Still here," Leigh said with a wave. Joseph pocketed the stone and took lumbering steps toward her.
"We require one more thing, Professor. The location of the third brother. Just as you've brought us to London, think of where it was you sent Elam. See it as clear as you can. Do this for us. The last thing you will do."
"And if I refuse?"
"You know what we'll do,"
Joseph said, tapping the stone in his pocket. He was right. No matter how much she refused, he would simply use the rock to send her back to that evil, poisonous void. She would squeal. All Leigh could do was nod in agreement. Joseph and Chloe stood on either side of her, each with a hand on her shoulders, and Leigh fought to find the memories. The ones coming on were muddy and fragmented. After all these years, it was more than difficult to imagine home. Some images came flooding back one by one. The mountain, running away, and the bed. The one where her mother had lain most of Leigh's childhood and teenage years. The professor's subconscious began to put it all together, and Chloe soon said, "Bingo." When the wormhole light dissipated, Leigh was on a white hillside, surrounded by pine trees as black as space. The air was as cold as an ice bath. Her shoulders were released, and Chloe stepped away into the freezing midnight air, her breath radiating with the moon's light.
"What is this place?"
Joseph asked, holding his gloved hand out to catch snow falling off the limb of a monstrous pine. "North of Red Lodge, Montana, near an old research facility," Leigh answered, lying, feeling more mental exhaustion set in than she ever had. "I sent it here."
"Montana. Might have known. No, there is no research facility. This is home to you. Or was,"
Joseph said.
How could he possibly know?
"What makes you say that?" Joseph let the flakes fall to the ground.
"A guess. Now, lead us."
Leigh glanced around. "I'm not exactly sure where your girlfriend landed us. We might be a mile away, maybe 2. And if you didn't notice, I'm the only one without a coat." Chloe stepped between Leigh and Joseph, locking a hard gaze on her. "Then walk quickly." Leigh voiced her protest with a huff.
The best I got.
And took off through the trees, stepping over logs and through banks of snow.
Do I mislead them? Am I going to freeze to death too soon to try? Or should I just show them? Because they'll find a way no matter what I do.
Leigh settled on the option involving her dying as late as possible. During a long stretch of silent marching, Joseph asked Chloe,
"Do you sense anything from the cirrus?"
She scoffed, sounding annoyed.
I told you, I took care of it. Her, those celestial bodyguards of hers, all of them. The cirrus is a non-issue.
That can mean many things. We need to be sure Ileana cannot warn Isaiah of our plans for Mr. Barker.
Chloe interrupted sharply.
I'm not discussing this further in front of the human.
Joseph dropped it. As her bearings returned, Leigh was forced to make several drastic turns, and one about-face, making sure they found the right path. At the second major turn, Chloe shouted,
The human is misleading us.
But Joseph shook his head.
We don't think so. She's freezing. The last thing she wants is to be out here any longer. Our beloved.
Chloe grew quiet, though clearly didn't let it go. The rest of the hike through the winter woods was not just miserably cold, but now also socially awkward. All the while, Leigh fought the rampant shivers and hopelessness overcoming her, still trying to think of something clever enough to say that might get her out of this alive. When she eventually discovered the main path through the woods to their destination, she began counting her blessings. 20 minutes later, the trees stopped in a hard line, revealing a clearing. At its center rested a cabin, its walls scruffed and cream-colored paint chipped away to the corners. On the cabin's porch rested a brown package the size of a small ice chest, with a shitty tape job and a mess of stamps on the side. Leigh was almost embarrassed. The post office had fucked her over so many times in her career, losing and damaging important packages and artifacts. She'd hoped they might have come through in a pinch and saved the day. Unfortunately, there it sat, perfectly placed on the welcome mat. She didn't even need to point the package out. As Joseph sniffed the air, gasped, and his mask settled on the porch.
Wonderful,
he said with a pleased snarl.
Great. Another step closer to World's End.
If there was ever a time to intervene, it was now.
Before you do this,
Leigh said, putting her body in between him and the cabin.
I want to speak with Mason, before he's lost for good. I want to know if he's still in there. Consider it my final request.
With his mask fixed on her, Joseph took a breath of palpable rage.
Mason?
Chloe asked, laughing.
What's she talking about?
Turning his shoulders away from his beloved for minimal privacy with Leigh, Joseph said,
If you speak that name again, I'll have your tongue.
Leigh's heart skipped. Her breath lurched out of her body.
You said I. He's been playing this whole time? What? Like a role? A part? Was it even Mason I spoke to? No, of course it wasn't.
Leigh wanted to punch herself.
Well, what did I expect from a demon?
With no response, the white mask pulled away, facing the cabin.
What a mean trick to pull,
Chloe said.
I fear you're having too much fun with these role-playing games, my love. She is distracting you. Let me run her through.
You will not,
Joseph said.
The only distraction is this moment. Now, a brother awaits.
Very well.
Chloe stepped onto the cabin porch. Kneeling, she took the box and ripped open the top with one hand. Packing peanuts and foam exploded, revealing a glimpse of the round stone shimmering inside. She took it to Joseph, who gave a faint gasp.
Elam.
Joseph removed the stone from the box with the care of removing a newborn from a crib.
He alone could split unearth in two, but once united with his brothers...
He sighed.
It isn't right. To not have the others in this moment brings us grief.
Let go of everything but wrath, Chloe said, sounding suddenly alarmed. Her gaze turned back the way they'd come, into the shadowed woods. We have company.
Oh, great. Now what?
The area fell as quiet as a still lake. In between her breaths, Leigh could hear rustling branches in the distance. A piercing wind was approaching low through the forest. Chloe looked worried. You sent for the archfiend? The imps were to be a last resort.
Imps? That doesn't sound good. What's going on?
We've arrived at last resort,
Joseph answered.
Not only are Isaiah's humans alive, they have grown in strength and are now joined by Hannah of Ao and her idiot archfiend retainer. Aeolius proved the Aeoli clan's effectiveness. They can keep Isaiah and the others busy while we see this through to the end.
Chloe didn't look or sound convinced. If something goes wrong, I can't protect you from them all. If something goes wrong...
Their loyalty lies with the beast above all. As long as ours appears too, all will be well.
Joseph turned to her.
You remember the third option. What to do if we should fail?
I'm not who you should be worrying about, my love, Chloe said, gazing into the looming pines surrounding them. A heavy feeling filled the air, similar to when Joseph got angry, but on a grand scale. Voices were carried to the clearing from the shadows, whispers turning Leigh's stomach. Shapes moved in the dark. Joseph handed the stones to Chloe and took commanding steps into the clearing, now a miniature figure on a lowered pulpit beneath a dark terrace. 2 red dots appeared among the shadows, then dozens more, blinking into life. The pack of thin, twisted eyes did not stand still, floating from branch to branch, releasing the most ferocious animal snarls Leigh had ever heard. Long snouts with leathery tendrils broke into the moonlight, but came no farther, blasting scorching plumes of steam into the air. What are these things? Leigh whispered to Chloe. Others, like my beloved. You'd call them demons. Chloe caught Leigh's gaze. Feel proud. No human has seen anything like this in 3,000 years.
Proud.
Leigh was at a loss of mind. Seeing creatures she'd put into the same category as the Wolfman or vampires had broken a part of her psyche. There seemed no escape from this new nightmare, unless by some dumb luck the front door to the cabin were open. But it was over a dozen yards away, and something deep down told her these creatures were swift, conceivably hungry, and a wooden door would provide little protection. Small movements seemed best. Joseph held his arms high.
The clan Leigh of the beast mark. Welcome.
A deep, rasping voice responded, chilling Leigh.
The Leigh clan is come, nameless, against the boundaries of the covenant. Haste, haste, in the name of Urk, show us this weapon.
They can talk? Of course they can.
Do not order us, Archfiend. We are of no clan.
Joseph bellowed.
The weapon is in our possession and speaks only with one. With it, we will topple the Morning Star. We've heard of this supposed quest for too long, Nameless.
One of the creatures snarled.
Leigh Sin wants to hear something new. Leigh Sin wants proof.
Others hissed in agreement.
I warn you now, Archfiend. Never test our resolve, nor that of the Medolian you see before you.
Joseph said, punching his syllables.
We all fight for the same thing. We all long to see the beast set free. To do it, we will need power. Behold, Rade and Ilam, the brothers of Gehenna.
Chloe approached the clearing and held up the stones for the dancing red eyes. Some demons gasped. Others laughed.
Gehenna has been proven real,
she called.
The war shall commence.
So, the rumors are true. This one was correct. Leigh is always correct. The Nameless One did lose their mind hiding in a mortal for so long.
The demon, Aelioin, said. Their clan hissed and snickered in response.
It's unthinkable. Leigh Uanse denounces it.
Another monster screamed.
Letting wrath waste away in flesh.
A glob of green-tinted spit fired from the shadows, landing a few feet from where Joseph stood, eating through the snow, sizzling, then into the ground beneath it.
Your crimes have put all of Unearth after you. And for what, Nameless? To chase rocks? To mate with a Malos user?
Chloe would have jumped into action if not for Joseph holding her back. The demons barked in chorus, like waves crashing on a rocky shore. When Chloe calmed and threw off his grip, Joseph took the stones, one in each hand, and held them high.
Leigh Uanse is a fool who will lead you down a disloyal path. You want to see the truth?
He roared and clenched the rocks close to his chest. A sound barreled over the area, like an overloaded locomotive slamming on its brakes. Joseph lifted his head to the sky as a gust of wind swept toward the center of the clearing, and a deep red mist evaporated off the stones, flowing down his arms, disappearing into his cloak and behind his mask. A scream pierced the chaos, like hundreds of live shellfish boiling, as he was lifted into the air, chest first. A flash of deep red, like blood without oxygen, revolved around him, turning the ground below as black as night. Joseph's shoulders stretched outward, and his fingers broke out of his gloves, leaving long, curled, green, razor-sharp claws to grip the stones. The sound eventually stopped, and the red mist disappeared. The chants of the monsters in the trees slowed as Joseph drooped to the ground, left catching his breath, his body steaming. Chloe pried the stones from his claws.
My love?
She asked, throwing back the hood of his cloak, revealing a steaming head with no hair. Rotten flesh fell into the snow, revealing patches of a skull dyed orange.
Oh, Joe.
From behind him, Leigh could only see a glimmer of his face, still covered by the white mask. The flesh around it had folded over it, keeping it in place, like a tree grown around a pole. Joseph stood with Chloe's assistance, now dwarfing her. A behemoth, well over 7 feet tall, even with his usual wicked, cane-handle hunch.
See this?
He roared, holding his clawed hand out.
The one thing Lucifer of Vale fears. The abyss.
The demons were worked into a tizzy, but also stifled, as though unsure of what to make of what they'd just seen. It was made all the worse when one of the monsters slipped out of the shadows and fully into the moon's light. A long, reptilian body with rows of clawed arms and whipping tendrils slithered through the air toward Joseph and Chloe and landed a few feet away, always remaining in motion, rarely on the ground, like a sagging helium balloon. The eyes in the trees burned brighter. The demons were sent into a frenzy, snarling and snapping their jaws. Smoke lifted into the air, as though the forest were set ablaze by an invisible fire.
False idol!
The demon facing Joseph shouted.
There is nothing here. Leigh is the seer of truth. The brothers are as false as the one who claims to wield them.
The creature hissed, turning back to the trees.
This one says the Leigh should reject the nameless and return to Eros before our discovery.
The demons voiced their opinions all at once. The howls cascaded with an ebb and flow, and soon every voice had similar tone and cadence. An agreement must have been made.
Leigh wants,
Joseph said calmly, as a black smoke with red highlights streamed from his hand across the clearing.
You know nothing of the abyss.
The mist swirled around the one called Leigh once, soaking into them, as it had Joseph.
What is this?
The creature shrieked, but their voice was cut off when their body turned a deep shade of gray. Leigh red eyes flung open in terror before their fire was put out, and their body collapsed and crumbled to the ground in a pile of black ash. The demons released unholy cheers, so high in pitch Leigh feared her eardrums might split. Raising his arms triumphantly, Joseph cried out,
Now you see, there is nothing greater. With the abyss, we will not only take the throne, we will burn it. We are done waiting. We are done wanting. We are done serving. Thousands of years ago, the beast walked free. It shall do so again. Walk with us.
The demons were in such a fury from Joseph's rhetoric, their skin began to glow.
For the beast! For the beast! For the beast!
Leigh caught a glimpse of Chloe watching the event with skeptical eyes, scanning the trees.
She doesn't trust them. Wonder why?
Are you with us?
Joseph cried over the clan. They confirmed by continuing the chant.
For the beast! For the beast! For the beast!
The demons believed Joseph wanted only the throne. Desperate for someone to return them to what they saw as their great glory, they elected a nameless force from the shadows with nothing but malevolent false promises. Against every ounce of instinct and intelligence she had, Leigh took her first steps into the clearing.
I'm the only human here, the only one who can fight for us. I have to try.
He's lying! She blurted out as loudly as she could muster. The gasps from the demons in the peanut gallery were like those of children seeing a spider approach. They don't want a war! The stones will destroy everything! You just saw what they can do! Joseph wants to do that to the planet! She was cut off by Chloe's hand jammed over her mouth. Leigh kept shouting, refusing to accept her rebellion was over, and she would probably be dying now. The demons' chant had stopped. Their eyes returned to floating in silence, awaiting a response from below, and Joseph allowed only a brief pause.
You see, this is what we have let the humans become. Brazen, unafraid. They once believed us gods from the underworld.
He pointed a clawed finger at Leigh.
Lucifer of Vale, the fallen celestial, has reduced the archfiend to pitiful, limp creatures.
The demons roared in anger as the woods were filled with an unyielding, burning tension. Leigh continued her fight for freedom, but Chloe's grip was absolute. The Medolian leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Those were your last words. Hope they were worth it." Her hand then slipped over Leigh's throat and squeezed. The sensation of boiling liquid pouring down her esophagus was the first to come, then something like a blast of liquid CO2. The excruciating attack was violent, but not bloody. Directed, specific, and pinpointed in her cells, like electricity. Chloe let go, leaving Leigh's inner throat feeling charred and ripped asunder, but somehow free from visible injury. Whatever warmth was left in Leigh's body departed, reducing her to shaking and collapsing under the sheer weight of the pain, clutching her throat desperately. She took a breath and released it through her vocal cords, producing choked gasps rather than words. "Every silver tongue is stolen eventually," Chloe said with a callous smirk, leaving Leigh to wallow on her hands and knees in the snow. Joseph continued his presentation for the demons, who had already moved on from Leigh's outburst.
Restore the glory of Eros,
he shouted.
Follow our call, the Third Lord.
The demons roared in response, breaking out of the trees and into the air, forming a swirling cyclone of smoke and fire overhead.
For the beast! For the beast! For the beast!
Leigh covered her ears, encompassed all at once by the freezing ground below, the piercing pain in her throat, and the howling chaos above. She wanted only to find some sort of release, to shout, to scream, to curse them all back to the pit they'd crawled out of. She took one more deep breath, raised her head to the sky, and let loose with a wail, releasing only silence.